All right, let's jump right in. Today we're looking at Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power. I think it's safe to say this is one of the more maybe controversial texts we've looked at. And full disclosure to our listeners, this isn't exactly a guide to being a good person. It's more about how to gain power. So, just something to keep in mind as we go through this.
Yeah, I mean, the source is very upfront about the fact that the world isn't always fair.
Yeah.
And these laws, they're not about morality, they're about strategy.
Right. It's like a manual for understanding how power really works.
Exactly. It's about seeing the patterns and understanding the game, even if you don't like all the rules.
So to get into it, maybe we can start by grouping some of the laws together thematically.
Sure, that's a good approach. Makes it easier to digest.
I mean, there's so much here, like deception and strategy. Those seem to be major themes in the source.
Yeah, for sure. Like right off the bat, the source talks about concealing your intentions. It's almost like a grandmaster in chess, thinking several moves ahead. If your opponent doesn't know your plan, they can't counter it.
That's a good point. It makes you wonder how much we give away without even realizing it, just in everyday life.
Right. Like if you're always broadcasting your intentions, are you making yourself vulnerable?
Totally. So playing it close to the vest can be an advantage.
Absolutely. And the source even takes it a step further with play a sucker to catch a sucker.
Oh, yeah. That one's a bit sneaky, isn't it?
It is, but think about it like this.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to make someone think they have the upper hand to actually trap them.
Oh, I see. So it's like setting a trap, like those sting operations you see in movies.
Exactly. The criminal thinks they're getting away with it, but it's all part of the plan.
Okay, that one's a little unsettling, but I can see the logic. Now, shifting gears a bit, reputation and perception seem to be huge pre-GE in the source.
Oh, they're central. And I think the source gives some really timeless advice there, like never outshine the master, for instance. It's a classic cautionary tale. Be careful not to make those in power feel threatened.
Right, you don't want to make waves or step on toes, especially if you're trying to climb the ladder.
It's about being aware of the power dynamics, understanding who's really in charge.
So does that mean it's best to just blend in, fly under the radar?
Well, not necessarily, because then you run into another law, court attention at all costs. The source actually argues that even negative attention is better than being ignored.
Whoa, really? So it's more about being strategic with how you get noticed.
Exactly. Think about it like this. In today's world, social media, everything's about visibility. Sometimes even a bad controversy can boost someone's profile.
Wow, that's a bit cynical, but I can see how it works. So it's like a calculated risk, knowing when to cause a stir.
And that's where things get tricky, right? Because then you have to balance attention with reputation.
It's like a constant tightrope walk.
And speaking of social dynamics, there's another cluster of laws that deal with manipulation. Those are really fascinating. Get into some deeper psychology.
Okay, yeah, let's go there. I'm curious about using absence to increase respect and honor. That one sounds so counterintuitive, but I feel like we've all seen it in action.
What's interesting about that law is that it taps into this idea of scarcity. When something is less available, it becomes more desirable.
Like limited edition sneakers or concert tickets.
Exactly. And the source applies that same principle to people and their time.
So playing hard to get isn't just a dating tactic, it's a power move.
You could say that, yeah. By withdrawing your attention strategically, you increase your perceived value.
Okay, that's pretty clever, even if it's a little manipulative. Makes you think twice about saying yes to everything, right?
Right. And this idea of understanding human psychology is key to a lot of these laws. Like, discover each man's thumbscrew, for instance.
Ooh, that one sounds a bit intense. What's that all about?
It's essentially about figuring out people's weaknesses, their insecurities.
So like their pressure points?
You could say that, yeah. But before we go thinking this is all about being evil and manipulative, think about it this way. It's just about understanding what motivates people, their fears and desires.
Oh, I see. So it can be used in neutral ways too, like those marketing campaigns that target our insecurities to sell us stuff.
Exactly. It's all about understanding how these principles work. Then you can decide how to use them.
So it's like a set of tools, and like any tool, you can use it for good or bad.
Exactly. It all comes down to the user and their intentions.
That's a great point, and it seems like a good place to pause and let our listeners reflect a bit. We've covered a lot of ground already, from deception to manipulation to psychology.
And we're just scratching the surface. There's so much more to unpack in the 48 Laws of Power.
So much more, and we'll be back soon to dive into some even deeper and maybe more controversial territory. But for now, take some time to think about what resonated with you and what you found most intriguing.
And ask yourself, how do these laws play out in your own life? Do you see them in action? Have you used them yourself? Maybe without even realizing it.
Those are great questions to ponder, and we'll pick up the conversation in our next deep dive.
See you then. Okay, so picking up where we left off, we were talking about those laws that deal with control and dominance. This is where things get really maybe a little ruthless, right?
Yeah, definitely where the Machiavellian side really comes out. What's a good example of that? A law that really exemplifies that dominance idea?
Well, I mean, one that jumps out is crush your enemy. Totally. The source is very clear about that. No mercy, no second chance.
Whoa, that's pretty intense. Like scorched earth, no survivor.
Right, and the source's reasoning is that leaving any opening for your opponent is just asking for trouble. They might come back to bite you later, seek revenge.
So it's like a preemptive strike, eliminate any future threats. I can see that in like a war or something, but does that really apply to everyday life?
Well, the source doesn't really distinguish, right?
Yeah.
It's more about the principle. I think it's important to remember context.
Bad habit.
These laws aren't meant to be applied blindly. You have to use your judgment.
Right, it's like if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Exactly. You don't want to go around crushing everyone who disagrees with you.
You don't have
So
a
it's more about
choice.
understanding the principle of total victory and when it might be appropriate.
And even then, there are risks, right? What about collateral damage? Unintended consequences?
Yeah, those are important considerations for sure. The source also talks about keeping people in a state of fear and unpredictability.
Right. There's that law. Keep others suspended in terror.
And no friends.
Cultivate an air of unpredictability. It's all about keeping people off balance so they can't outmaneuver you.
So being unpredictable is a good thing, but doesn't that create a toxic environment?
Well, the source argues that being predictable makes you vulnerable. If people know what to expect from you, they can manipulate you.
I see. So it's about having an element of surprise.
Think about it like this. A leader who's totally erratic, no one knows what they'll do next. Or a negotiator who throws in unexpected demands, keeps everyone guessing.
It's like a mind game. But yeah, taken too far, that could definitely backfire.
And that's where the balance comes in again, right? Knowing how much is too much.
Okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here. These laws can be powerful, but they need to be used carefully and with awareness.
Exactly. It's like learning martial arts. You can use your skills for good or bad.
All right, let's move on to another cluster of laws. How about manipulating desires and perceptions?
Well, that's a good one. The source has a lot to say about that. One that comes to mind is play into people's fantasies.
Oh, that sounds intriguing. What's that all about?
Basically, it's about understanding people's desires, their idealized vision of themselves, and then using that to your advantage.
So like creating an illusion, a story that people want to believe.
Exactly. Think about those marketing campaigns that promise you'll be rich or beautiful. They're selling a fantasy, right? Not necessarily reality.
Yeah, totally. Like those weight loss ads that show these incredible transformations.
Exactly. They're tapping into our insecurities, our desire to be something we're not.
So being aware of those tactics is important so we don't get sucked in.
Right. It's about being a critical thinker, questioning the messages we're bombarded with.
Okay, so play on fantasies is one way to manipulate perceptions. What else does the source suggest?
Well, there's this idea of creating a spectacle, a grand display to awe and captivate people.
Oh, like those elaborate product launches, the red carpets, all that.
Exactly. It's about creating a spectacle, something memorable that people will talk about.
And in today's world, that translates to going viral, right? Getting those clicks and shares.
It's like the source predicted the rise of social media and the attention economy.
Okay, this is all fascinating, but I'm starting to wonder, does the source have any advice on using these laws for good? Or is it all just about gaining power no matter the cost?
Well, it's tricky, right? The source presents these laws in a pretty neutral way. It's more like a guide to understanding how power works, not necessarily a moral compass.
So it's up to the reader to decide how to use this knowledge.
I think so. Yeah, it's like a toolbox. You can use the tools to build or to destroy.
That's a good analogy. It all comes down to the user and their intentions.
But I will say the source does offer some insights into ethical considerations, especially when it comes to self-preservation and navigating difficult situations.
Okay, that's what I'm interested in. How can we use these laws to protect ourselves without becoming manipulators?
That's a great question, and I think it leads us into another dimension of the source's teachings.
Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into the 48 laws of power. We've covered a lot of ground so far. Deception, manipulation, all sorts of, maybe not the most ethical tactics, let's be honest.
Right, it's been a wild ride.
But I think for this last part, I want to focus on what the source says about self-preservation. Because it's not all about attacking and manipulating others, right?
There's a whole element of protecting yourself, surviving in a world where everyone's playing the game.
Exactly. And there's this one law that really stood out to me. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous.
Oh, that's a good one. It's counterintuitive, right?
Totally. You'd think building walls and keeping people out would make you safe.
But the source argues the opposite. Isolation actually makes you more vulnerable.
So it's better to be out there, engaged, even if it means being around potential rivals.
Think of it like this. If you're holed up in your fortress, you have no idea what's going on outside. You can't see the threats coming. You can't gather information.
It's like that old saying, keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
Yeah.
You need to know what's happening, who's moving and shaking.
Exactly. Isolation breeds ignorance, and ignorance is dangerous in this game.
It makes you think about networking, not just for career advancement, but for self-preservation too. Having allies, even if they're not always perfect, can be a buffer.
It's like having eyes and ears everywhere, right?
Yeah.
You get a wider perspective.
Like in the animal kingdom, being part of a herd offers more protection than going it alone.
Great analogy. There's strength in numbers, even if some of those numbers have their own motives.
So listener, think about your own network. Are you too isolated? Could you benefit from expanding your circle, even if it means stepping outside your comfort zone?
Another law that focuses on self-preservation is know who you're dealing with. Do not offend the wrong person.
Seems pretty straightforward, right? Don't poke the bear.
But it goes deeper than that. It's about understanding social hierarchies, doing your research, knowing who has real power versus who just projects an image of power.
Like in an office, sometimes the person with the biggest title isn't the one calling the shots.
Exactly. You have to read between the lines, understand the unspoken rules.
It's all about observation, not just listening to what people say, but watching how they behave.
Right. Who do they defer to? Who do they try to impress? That tells you a lot.
Okay, so we've got cultivating connections, but also being aware of who to avoid.
And there's another piece to that puzzle, knowing when to step back. Avoid getting entangled.
Ooh, that sounds wise. What law is that?
Don't commit to anyone. The source argues that aligning yourself too closely with others can limit your options.
It's like that saying, you lie down with dogs, you wake up with fleas.
You don't want to get dragged down by someone else's bad decisions.
So it's about staying neutral, keeping your options open.
Think of it like Switzerland. Neutral in conflicts, offering a mediating presence.
That can be a powerful position, especially when everyone else is fighting.
You can observe objectively, assess the situation, maybe even broker a deal that benefits everyone.
So it's a strategic approach to power dynamics, not just about self-preservation.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Okay, so we've got connections, detachment, observation. It's a lot to juggle.
And that brings us back to this idea of strategic thinking, which is really at the heart of all these laws.
There's that law plan all the way to the end. It sounds a bit overwhelming, but
But the point is, if you don't have a plan, you're just reacting to whatever comes your way.
you're at the mercy of events instead of shaping them.
Exactly. The source is all about
habit.
being proactive, thinking ahead, anticipating obstacles.
So listener, take a moment to reflect on your own goals, your aspirations. What steps can you take today
don't
to
have
move
a
closer
choice.
to them? What obstacles do you need to plan for?
As we wrap up our deep dive into the 48 laws of power, remember, these laws aren't meant to be followed blindly.
They're more like guidelines or even provocations to make you think differently about power.
The source doesn't offer easy answers. It's about understanding the principles and then making your own choices.
So listener,
Hello,
we've given you a lot
friends.
to consider today. Some of it might feel a bit unsettling.
But ultimately, it's up to you to decide what resonates with you, what feels ethical, what you're willing to put into practice.
Because the real power lies in the ability to choose.
Choose wisely.